Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. We have a special three-part series on Choshen Mishpat. We're learning Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra. Many of us have learned a few hundred dafim by now in the Bavas, and Rabbi Brut will be exploring the Torah, Choshen Mishpat, Shulchan Aruch, Choshen Mishpat, and the various Maharshim and Seforim that have been authored on Choshen Mishpat. Today we're going to be starting with the Beis Yosef, the Rama, the Maharshal, maybe a couple others. And as usual, Rabbi Brut will give us more than just the times that they were born and the dates that they died. So stay tuned. This episode has been dedicated anonymously in memory of Lili Nishmas, Miriam Bas, Reb Menachem Zev, and as a refuah shalema for Rav Avigdor Binyamin ben Peril from it should be refuah shalema, and be in Eloi Neshama as well for the Neshama of Miriam Bas, Reb Menachem Zev. Rabbi Brut, take it away.
Okay. So, just as a general introduction, I'm not trying to cover all aspects that relate to Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat. It's in the Dava Seif. It will require a lot to discuss. I hope to return to some of it. What I basically hope to do is, where are the Nosei Kelim coming from? Who are the teachers? A little bit about their Mahalchim, and some other interesting things. Now, in order to get to the Nosei Kelim, we have to step back, and we have to start talking about is the Beis Yosef, or Beis of Karo, the Rama, Ramesh Itzelis, and Rav Shlomo Luria, the Maharshal. And we'll see why shortly. But before that, in general, just to mention a few important ha'aros about Choshen Mishpat in general. Number one it's impossible to emphasize enough the importance of learning Choshen Mishpat. The Chazon Ish in Emunah B'Tachin, Parag Gimel, has arichos nifla about the chashivas of learning halacha in general, and he constantly, Kaseda throws out there about learning Choshen Mishpat. It's built off Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, in which he quotes in his letters printed in Ar Yisrael, and fascinating material. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, Lamashal, writes, Treifus, of course, people are so makbid about, but what about Choshen Mishpat and Yanim that are Negea Roiv Meyadim Loidrashu Al Chash Gezel? They're not so concerned about this area of Torah, and the way to learn about it and to understand this in depth is by learning the halachas arasoif, and the Chazon Ish, building off this, adds a lot of different klaiches, kedai to learn through very carefully, but basically by learning the halachas and the diktuke halachas and the prate pratim, says the Chazon Ish, says Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, this is the best way how to get your hands and feet know what to do in these situations. Now, that's number one. However, number two is, everyone knows, familiar, Rav, we pass like Rav and Yisurim, and Shmuel and Dinim, meaning Mamonis. What's behind this? So I came across, a while ago, a fascinating piece from the Chavis Yair, in his incredible work called Mar Keshisha, where he tries to explain that, Shmuel was we know Shmuel Lamashal, famous. He was famous for experts in knowing where the stars and all the astronomy, astrology, these type of aspects. His kayach, whereas Rav was a baki nifla. So Rav, Bekiyas is necessary when one learns Sefer HaTerumot, because it's tali in tremendous yeda of Mishnayos, Braisos, etc. Shmuel, he was a muflig in Charifos and Iyun. He was able to use his kayach sichli to picture things, keywords, and be mefaret and mafrid dvarim apichlukim kolshu shebeneim v'todesei v'hem dinei mamanis, that we know she'echam mimei shnuim b'mishnayos v'braisos v'tzrichim tzir v'dimyon b'nidam v'nidon lidmois davar l'davar l'chalik b'neim v'davar muet ki yishtana hadin al pi shinoi hanidin kechut hasayra v'zebar. It's not so much a yeda in Bekiyus, says the Chavis Yair, but you have to have an amkus and charifus, which we'll get to in later episodes, which is what's going on behind some of the more famous Gedolei Achronim, such as the Ksais and the Sivis. But the point is, he is saying this already with Rav and Shmuel, that's what's going on in the Chush, in their Yeda, and what they were known for. Okay. A general story that ties into this, and is that a book that I'm fond of quoting from, I quote from many times, is a book about the Gadol Miminsk, one of the Gedolei Alita, who dies in the late 1800s, in the 1890s. The book was actually recently translated into English, but basically, at one point, there were complaints that were voiced when he first became a Rav. There were complaints voiced about his method of all different aspects. And he listened to what the a few different Balabatim told him, and they said, when it comes to areas of Choshen Mishpat, you're a lamdan, but you don't know what's going on. You're not down to earth. You have to have understanding and a practicality in understanding the business world, so to speak. How can you paskin a Choshen Mishpat? And we feel it's lacking. Because you don't know what's going on in the world. It's affecting your psak. Now, fascinating thing is, normally if a Rav got such a thing from a Balabas, unless he's getting a major salary from this particular Balabas, you throw the Balabas right out for such a chutzpah and everything. But the Minsker Gadol was bigger than that. And he basically, what he ends up doing is he took a few different people that were experts in the business world. He describes if there's a solution, what he did was, and he sat with them for a few months. And these guys were experts in the business world. They were businessmen, and they explained to him all different pratim. And through this, he said, so it was batala, but he did it specifically in time when he wasn't able to learn as well. And he basically 3 months time he sat with these balabatim, and he got a complete understanding of the business world enough for him. And he said, just like we have the famous Gemara, Rav sat 18 months to understand with he sat with shepherds to understand with Hilchos Treifas. So I didn't spend that much time. I took 3 months time, and this helped me for the rest of my life. All the psakim and the areas of Choshen Mishpat, I gained so much from this. So interestingly enough, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter throws out there, similar in the same place in our Yisrael in a different letter, and when you learn Choshen Mishpat with a Balabas, it's very geschmack because they can understand it, they relate to it, and they and it's. If you know how to bring it out, you could let's say a Rav that's an Isaac in the business and has an understanding of the business world. You can make it very practical and again. One other nakuda relating to this last point with Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and the Minsker Gadol is Chazal. As you learn through Nezikin, and you learned in depth how incredible Chazal did have, say the Minsker Gadol, he had to spend 3 months time. But Chazal is clear from as you learn through these Masechtas, they had a incredible understanding of all the details of the business world of those days, and etc. etc. You could see this Keseder, unbelievable how they thought of all different things. Okay, and the last nakuda relating to Choshen Mishpat to throw out there is there's a fascinating piece from the Darchei Moshe that he says, in general, we find that the Paiskim of Ashkenaz are more machmir. This is, he points out, Archaim and Yeridei. Choshen Mishpat, they're more makel comparing to Svarad, to people from Spain, just Svarad, just using the word Spain, just for the lack of a different word. What's going on here? So he says like this. He says because of the Yidden from Svarad, they had it better. They were not affected by wherever they were. Well, let's say in Spain. So we know the Rishonim at that time, for the most part, they didn't have Xeris against them with money issues. So they therefore, whereas the Jews of Poland, Ashkenaz, they did have problems where they were. So Memela, the Paiskim were more makel in inyanim of Choshen Mishpat, and that's why we find more kulas and Ashkenaz Paiskim are more makel in inyanim of Mamanis than our brothers, the Sephardi Gedolim. This is a point that Maharshal makes. Rabbi Zimmel, in his fascinating book, it's H.J. Zimmel's, which is a book called Ashkenaz and Sephardim, he says that it seems to be true, this point that the Darchei Moshe is making, but I'm sure there's a lot of people have what to say about it. Okay, these are just brief remarks about Choshen Mishpat in general. Obviously, you talk a lot more about it. Let's jump right into it. You start the world of halacha, Choshen Mishpat. You have the Rishonim, and you have the Rambam. Psak halacha, you get to the Rambam. Fine. The Rosh, okay. We move on. We have the Tur, the son of the Rosh. So now we know he made the what's now known as the Tur, the Arba Turim, and he coined it, one of the halakim, called it Choshen Mishpat. When does this? He's the one who gave this name. When was this name given, and what's going on behind it? Did he originally set out to write about what's now known as Dalech Chelkei Shulchan Aruch? It's all coming from him. We say before Shulchan Aruch, the Dalech Halakim is all coming from the Tur. All these things, and what was his plans? What was his goals? What was his kavanah of his chibur? It seems to be that Choshen Mishpat Mashal was specifically for Dayanim. So all this is discussed in various articles and the doctrine of Yehuda Galinsky. Okay, but one chibur that really stands out, which is important before we move on, is the Sefer HaTerumot. Sefer HaTerumot, from a Rishon, Mamish Ben Daira of the Ramban, it seems. So this Rishon wrote a massive work on in Yonam of Choshen Mishpat. Says Rabbi Ephraim Zal Margolis in Haskama of the work Sefer HaTerumot when it was being reprinted in the 1800s, he says, Kimimenu lakhu roiv tayrasha sharabeinu hatur b'chele Choshen Mishpat. What's the main primary makar for the Tur in Choshen Mishpat is the Sefer HaTerumot. So therefore, it's obviously worthy of being republished, says Rabbi Ephraim Zalman in the 1800s. Okay. He says, which is up for discussion, but he says he was Rabbeinu Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Chasari, Talmud Muvak L'Ramban. Okay, whatever, that's beyond the conversation for today. Then Rabbi Ephraim Zalman brings down that he had a Messiah, that the Shach went out of his way to make sure to get a copy of this work, because he also chapped what the significance of this chibur of the Sefer HaTerumot for Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat, which he was working on his masterpiece. So he went and he got it, and Rav Chaim Zalman says he was maslich in getting it. And at this reprinting in the 1800s was with the work Gedulei Truma. The Gedulei Truma was a work on the Sefer HaTerumot, a Be'in de Kaperish from Rabbi Zaria Fico, the famous Bina Le'itim in the world of Drush, which was first published in 1645. So immediately afterwards, after he publishes his Parish on Sefer HaTerumot, the Shach makes it his business to get it in Vilna, and it gets from Italy to Vilna, and he uses it in his work. Okay, so the point these are just early works, important works, besides the Torah, the Sefer HaTerumot, in learning Choshen Mishpat Halacha L'Maisa. Okay, in general, now we're getting right to the main, so to speak, the main point of our conversation today. In general, Achronim, there's not a lot of material written about Achronim. People were Isaac in writing about Achronim over the centuries, but not enough. So even though we have a lot of information, especially if one looks like today, but we're still in the dark about many issues, and therefore I'm just saying right now, today, I'm not planning on the Kol HaTorah Kula Al Regel Achas, even of what we do know. I'm just going to mention some brief nakudis that are helpful, and they'll be helpful for the next other episodes also in general. And these remarks are also helpful for all areas of Shulchan Aruch. Okay. Now, one point of interest is that the Beis Yosef, who's one of the main people we'll be dealing with right now, the Rama, and the Maharshal, we don't have to speculate about certain aspects of why they wrote their works and what their methods of psak is, because they each left behind introductions to their work where they outline mamish, black and white, what they plan on doing. So these introductions are unbelievable to read carefully again and again what's going on in them. One can learn a lot, and we're going to mention some of the points today. Okay, so we'll start with Rabbi Yosef Karo. So basically on him, just to mention very, very briefly, there's been a lot of literature, but as I said, we're still left in the dark about many things. Just to mention, Rabbi Yisrael Grunwald, famous for writing the work on the Kolba and Hilchos Avelis, he wrote a very nice work in the 1950s based on the material that he had on Rabbi Yosef Karo. Not necessarily as all his conclusions hold up, especially what we know today, but for that period of time, he went out of his way to get rare Seforim, and he also was aimed on that a lot of times in first editions of certain Seforim, we could get all these little details, which we'll mention some shortly. Okay, Meir Ben Yo was Isaac on the Beis Yosef, but he never published a full work on the Beis Yosef. He published a work called Yosef Bechiri, which deals with the Beis Yosef, but he focuses on his Talmidim, the Pulmusim that he had with the Mabit, and some other aspects of the Beis Yosef, but he left behind, he was always planning on getting back to a lot of other material about the Beis Yosef. A lot of focus on the Beis Yosef has to do with his Magid and the world of Kabbalah. How much Kabbalah does he bring into the Beis Yosef / Shulchan Aruch? In recent years, I would say in the past 5-10 years, over 5 or 6 works have come out on the Beis Yosef, and more are set to come out. And many articles have also come out. Lamaisa, just to mention, I'm not going to mention any of these books and these articles, but if you look at the Beis Yosef, it's simply incredible what he was able to accomplish. What do I mean? If you look, he was a prolific writer, and just look at the work, the Kesef Mishnah on the Rambam, and then the Beis Yosef on Daler Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. He had not Chelkei Shulchan Aruch actually, because we're not up to the Shulchan Aruch yet. We're before the Daler Chalokim of Halacha that the Tur set up, or Chaim Yeridei Choshen Mishpat Even Ezer. He puts out these massive works. So to mention briefly, a person I'm fond of always quoting, the Chida. So the Chida spends a lot of time, he's fascinated with the Beis Yosef, and he says, L'mashal, he grabbed the links into the Magid, that he had, the special maggid that came to him. And interesting, there's a famous thing that many people have heard. I'm not sure the earliest source. I know that Rabbi Chaim Zalman brings it down, that people say that he was told by his maggid to make sure, get a move on getting your work out, because there's other people working on the work, so to speak, the Rama. And we're going to see shortly that that's what ends up happening. He basically beats out the Rama. Here it says, "Margol b'pia olam ki hamagid amar lebeis Yosef shehi azariz umagdim lahadbas chibar beis Yosef shelo yakdimenu acher b'medinas Poland Krakow shemachaber al derech zeh." We say the Magid let him in on a secret that there's a person working on it in Krakow, Poland, mamish at the same time. Make sure you get yours out first. Okay. We don't have this piece, but this is what people say. Rabbi Chaim Zalman already brings this down. L'baisa, what do we know about the Beis Yosef from the Chidah? So just to mention, I'll just mention very, very briefly. Chaim Vital says that he's either from the Shirish Neshama of, in one place he says, Shem Darizal, he has the Shirish Neshama from Yehuda Bar Eloi. And another place he says he's Shirish HaRajba, HaRa'av, HaRav HaMagid, V'kama Tnoim, V'maram, V'go'inim. I'm going to try to explain the drop about the Rajba shortly. Okay, he has this Magid everyone knows about what Shavuos at night. Then says the Chidah, v'toif v'gadlosim v'chshivasim v'forsim shenespashter ha'roisim v'svar v'kadoshim beis Yosef v'kesav Mishnah v'shulchan aruch v'chol tfutzas ha'goyla. Migdali Talmidov was Rav Moshe Kadavaru, Ram Galanti, the Alshich, and others. He talks about his chibur on Klali Hashas, Chuvis. He writes prolifically, and the Beis Yosef, the Chidah, devotes a lot of space about his works in his various writings. Okay. Lamaisa, we have a work of someone from Taimon that visited Tzfas in the time of Rabbi Yosef Karo, and he describes visiting the yeshiva on Shabbos, that there were 200 bachrim sitting there learning, and he describes a whole piece about what happened in this drasha, what he heard, he transcribes. This is only printed in this century. Okay. So we see not only is he prolific, he has many Talmidim, and he's from all over. We know he came from Sfarad. With the Gerish Sfarad he leaves, and he ends up in all different places, eventually settling in Tzfas. Okay. He meets different people, he becomes close with different people. All this is beyond the scope of what we want to talk about. But what we know at a certain point in time, he tells us that in 1522, he starts working on the Beis Yosef. And he works on it for approximately 20 years. He finishes it in Shin Beis, but it takes a long time until he actually publishes it. Why? So he says he was Isaac in going through it again, and he wanted to make sure to review it again, that there shouldn't be any mistakes. Fine. Now, he was born in 1488. He dies in 1575. So the kids are early on. He's already beginning this massive undertaking called the Beis Yosef. When it actually comes to print, we find that he printed the first time 800 copies. We know all different types of details, that it was printed a bunch of times in his lifetime. Okay, we're not going to bore everything with all this. Choshen Mishpat, it takes a long time to come out compared to the other ones. There's a fellow Reb Chaim Ashkenazi. He writes an article where he shows that there was some fights going on in the publishing house. It was published actually in Italy. You say it was sent from Tzfas to Italy. There's a lot of other aspects to that story. Fine. Say that, but Lamaisa, what happens is, when you look at this work and you sit and you learn a few simanim in Shulchan Aruch with the Beis Yosef, you are blown away. He brings down incredible amounts of information. And Lamaisa, without getting into all aspects which we're going to say shortly, the point, and this remains one of the main significances of the Beis Yosef. We're talking about that one of the Gedolei HaPoskim. Forget about what he actually comes to the conclusions and is this material that he brings from and becomes a library already in his generation. For even the Rama and the Maharshal end up using it as a library, and for centuries it was used as a library. For many people, that's what they learned. They learned Torah, and then they learned Beis Yosef, because, as we're going to see, what the Beis Yosef does. So what does the Beis Yosef do? So before getting into discussing exactly what he says, what he does in the Beis Yosef, we'll mention like this. L'mashal, the Rajba. So the Rajba was beyond prolific. Hundreds and hundreds of tshuvas. So the Beis Yosef goes out of his way, and he collects all the tshuvas Rajbas, and he brings them down. Gewaldig. But more than that. As Simcha Emanuel outlines, he went out of his he also uses manuscripts of the Rajba that he had, and he makes sure to put them in all the right places. And the reason is very simple. The Rajba, as he just said, was one of the Gedolei Rishonim, and he left behind an incredible legacy of writing. So one of the many, many different things that the Beis Yosef does is he makes sure to put in the right place all the necessary tshuvas. Now, for centuries, people didn't even have many of these tshuvas, and some of them were, as I just said, from manuscript that the Beis Yosef did have. So in this article, Simcha Emanuel deals with it at length. But he does this for many different things. And one of the reasons, kind of what I would like to add, is why the Rajba Lamashal he goes out of his way to do this. Besides the great significance of the Rajba is because, as I said, from the Arizal, there's some type of kesher with his neshama and the Rajba. Okay, that's just a theory. Bottom line is, he goes and he collects from a crazy amount of information and publishes it, puts it in this work, Beis Yosef. Now, it's not just that he brings you, that this guy says this person says this person says this. He brings the whole Lashonis and he starts from scratch. And that's one of the main points that I would like to bring out with the Beis Yosef. And that is like this. As I said, you open up the Beis Yosef and he has Hagdama. And he says, and he outlines very, very carefully what it is that he intends to do. He says like this. Basically, right away in the beginning, we see him throwing out the following sentence: Ki loy nasis haTorah kibeis Torahs ela k'Torah. There's too much material out there. So it's not that there's going to be two Torahs, there's too many. This guy says, I'm relying on this Sefer. This guy says, I'm relying on this Sefer. And this was something that was getting him nervous. And over time, there's going to be more and more Seforim coming out. So we need to have Psak Halacha L'Maisa. And people don't know what's up. So he is going to try to make Seder from this chaos. That's number one. But then he goes, and he says, but let's say you're going to have to go through every single thing to track down from the source, from the Gemara and the Maharshal and the Poskim. It's an unbelievably hard feat to do such a thing. Finding all the places in the sugya, it's a very complex thing to do. So he decided he's going to make it easier on that. So what does he do? He says, and then he throws out at one point, even if someone's going to do this, there's another thing called shikha. You're going to forget. So there's just so much. So you could say like this, okay, fine. So what I'll do is I'll rely on what's called Kitzur Svarim. What Kitzur Svarim does he throw out there? He says there's a word called the smak, there's a word called the agar, the kolboy. So he says, yeah, but the problem is, he says, it's full of mistakes. He writes very sharply over here, shockingly, about the Sefer Agar. He says there's theories in it. Fine. So he's not a fan of this work. So what does he say? What do you have to do? He's going to take everything and he's going to start from scratch. He's going to bring you down to Gemara. So he's going to bring you down to Rishonim. He says like this. But I didn't want to just write my own work. I needed to find a work to put my work on top of, so to speak. He said first he was thinking with the Rambam. Lamaisa, he did put out a work on the Rama. We know the Kesef Mishnah, but he chose not to. And then he said, you know what? There's a work called the Torah. The Torah is great. It's a kitzer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I'm going to add to that and give you everything that you need to know. And you're not going to have to look elsewhere. And what I'm going to do is as follows. He outlines this very carefully. If there's a Mishnah, Braisa, Tosefta, whether it's in Talmud Bavli, Yerushalmi, a Sefer Seferei, Mechilta, whatever it is, I'm going to bring you that down. And then I'm going to bring with the Rif and the Rambam and the Rishonim. And then he's going to say like this. So you're basically going to have in front of you Misudar, Rashi, Taisis, the Ran, the Piskei Rif, the Rosh, the Mordechai, the Rambam, the Maggid Mishnah, Rabbeinu Yerucham, the Sefer Truma, Shibalei Aleket, Rekeach, Shari Dura, Sefer Tazritz, Itur, Muki Yosef, and the list goes on and on. Now, what's interesting is at the end of the list, he says, okay, this is not for us right now because we're discussing mostly Choshen Mishpat. He throws in, he's going to have some Ashkenazi Svarim, the Maharshal, the Trumas Hadeshen. Okay. Now, then he talks about the Chuvas HaRajba, which we already spoke about. And then he says, I have even some recent works that were written on the Torah. You have to understand, in this period of time, the Torah was mamish learned ever since the Torah came out. And he has a work from Yitzchak Abuav, and he has a work from Yaakov ben Chaviv, and he's going to bring down their material. But he says, once I'm already doing this and I attached it to the Torah, I'm also going to deal with mistakes crept into the Lashon of the Torah. So I'm also going to deal with this. Okay, so first, before anything, right now, if we stop right here, we see, and this is what Lamaisa, after everything is said and done, it took time for people to realize how great and important what he did was, but basically, he made it that you didn't have to go to this. In those days, Seforim, even though Seforim were being printed, the printing press only began a little earlier, but there was still a lot of information. Dozens of Rishonim were out there and stuff like that. He made it much easier for someone. You don't have to sit and open up all the texts. You had one-stop shop, so to speak, to learn it. He brought the Lashonis even in many of the cases, and you could learn and get to the bottom. But you're starting from scratch. So it's not like Stam Alikut Sefer, which is being makasser and then mistakes creep in. He's bringing you down to Lashonis. Now, obviously, he doesn't bring you down every single lashon of every single one of these pieces, even of the list that he does, because if that would be the case, the volumes would be even much, much longer. But he has a way how he does it, which needs to be analyzed. People in recent years have been working on analyzing it, and I still believe that there's more to say about it, but okay. But bottom line is, he's taking a crazy amount of information and making it accessible. And for the next, until today, many times when people sit and learn, let's say in the Kailo, you're learning halacha l'maisa, you can't open up every single rishon. So what do? You start with the Torah Beis Yosef, and he brings you the important information, and you move on to the Shulchan Aruch. That's the next step. Okay, now what says the Beis Yosef? One of my concerns was, what about psak halacha? So he says, I'm not going to paskin. Each case is very complex. And if I go through every Raya and the Sugya and every Taisis and the Ramban, the Raj and the Ram and the Ran, there's so many tainis and everything. And who am I to stick my head in over here into Mechriya? So what does he do? He refers to Klali Apsak. Klali Apsak is that Klal Yisrael, he says, up till now, relied on three great people: the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rush. So I'm doing very simple. במקום ששניים מהם מסכימים לדעת אחוז, נפסק הלכה כמויסם. אם לא במקסס מקיימס שכל חכמי ישראל רואים מחולקים על דעת הוא, לכן פשוט המינוי בהפך. So basically, he's going to do very simple. If there's a machlokes, he's going to do whoever wins. 2 verse 1. Okay. So now, what's fascinating is he's sort of bringing you a crazy amount of information, and then, but how do we paskin? It's not his voice in the Psak Halacha. So now, obviously, the question is that really true? Is there no voice of the Beis Yosef and Gans Beis Yosef Val Chelkei Shulchan Aruch? He doesn't say anything of himself, any of his own chedushim. He does. Does he reach certain conclusions? He does. How much? This also has to be figured out. But the bottom line is, he had this massive library, which he enumerates many of the titles. But as he said, I mentioned this Chaim Ashkenazi wrote about this in Yeshurun, and earlier Yehuda Lieber ben David has an article on Mayan where he lists out also many of the volumes that we find that the Beis Yosef had, and this incredible library is a significant data. So there's multiple uses and importance of the Beis Yosef, and this is the starting of the conversation when one learns halacha. After the tour, and we're talking Choshen Mishpat, you have to learn the Beis Yosef very, very carefully. Why? Because he has all the material. Now, just to mention two other fascinating ideas of the Beis Yosef, and we'll move on, is the Kairi Hadairis, which is a very significant historical work. So he records that he met a family member of the Beis Yosef, an Einikol of the Beis Yosef, and he had a conversation with him. And the Beis Yosef this Einikol told this the Baal Kairi Hadairis that, you know how many times my grandfather Beis Yosef finished Shas? 3 times. And I remember when he says, B'Shas P'tirasai B'chlal Shvachal Amalon Sharav Ziknoi Amar B'Shas P'tirasai Shezacha Lulmoid HaTalmud Kuloi Shalosh Pa'amin. And he lived long. He lived till 87. So I remember when I first saw this piece that the Beis Yosef learned Shas 3 times, and you hear all different stories. What's going on here? So the answer is like this, and this helps us understand the part of the greatness of the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef was not just this bucky that went ahead and collected all this material from all the Seforim that he had. He had a massive library, and Tzfas also had a massive library. You know this because a contemporary of the Beis Yosef is Betzalel Ashkenazi. He puts out the Shittin Gobetzes, and we know others that there was a lot of Seforim going on over there. So it's not just that he was a guy in Olam. So what Shad he learned Shas 3 times? The answer is like this: he's a Talmud of the school of Rav Kampanton, which was known for doing massive iyun amok in learning. They had a very specific mahalach halimud where they spent incredible amounts of intense limud, learning very slowly everything in the Gemara, very biyun. This is enumerated in the Sefer from Rav Yitzchak Kampanton, which we have, and he's a Talmud of that school, and that explains. It does. I assume the Beis Yosef learned Shas many more times, but just in this iyun, this Meir de Amkus was only 3 times. And the reason why I'm throwing this out here is to show it's not just, okay, he's this guy, he had this nice library, he's doing what today would be cutting and pasting. No, he's taking this massive material, and that's part of this great Goyin, the Beis Yosef, is why, amongst other reasons, why he becomes as time goes on. The question is exactly when. The Paisuk of Klal Yisrael, him and the Rama, and just to quote a piece of a contemporary found, Meir Ben Yo brings this piece from. It's printed in the Tshuva of Rabbi Yosef, in the Tshuva of Rabbi Yosef Karo, that he's already famous. And he did an important thing. He's a tremendous Meir Ra, and it's not just that he was ma'asif, but he goes through the shirashim of the dinim, and we rely on him. Anyway, the point is that the first nakuda that I'm trying to bring out with the Rebbe of Cairo is that he does this incredible thing of gathering a crazy amount of information, mesudar, on the tour, and he puts it out. And it has a lasting impact, even if you don't paskin like him, but for all the material that he does bring. Okay, then eventually he goes ahead and prints the Shulchan Aruch. He realizes it's not enough, and the Shulchan Aruch comes out in 1565, and then numerous other times until comes along the Rama, and that's the next person in our story. So going to the Rama, a lot of times when people say, so Rama is born in 1525 and he dies in 1572. He dies young, relatively, and again, similarly to the Beis Yosef, we have Agdama of his, the Darchei Moshe, so we have insight in his method and a little bit about him. But in general, when you talk to people and you say, oh, what's the story to Rama? So you say, oh, there's a great book, there's this fat book from Professor Asher Ziv, and Taka, it's a very nice book, but it's not close to enough. There's many more questions, and some of them I'll even mention shortly, that we don't know the answers to when we talk about the Rama. Now, Professor Elchanan Reiner, who spent a lot of time being chayker this period of time, has written that even with everything, the Rama, there's still plenty what to answer with the Rama. So I'll mention it shortly. So the Rama, I said, when he's born, and basically he's considered for Polish Jewry the Paisik. When that exactly happens is not important for us, but he's a Talmud and son-in-law of the Gadol Adar of Shachri Milublin. When one opens up Maharshal the Tzemach David, who's a contemporary, he's alive in this period of time, he talks about the Rama. When he's nifter, he says, V'mid Talmidim Harbe, the Hirbitz Torah Yisrael, but with Krakow, about 20 years. He dies, in 1572. 1573. Again, we're not going to get into the exact date. This is a whole discussion. Fine. But Kitzer, what's fascinating is like this. He's the Rama, he has a yeshiva, many Talmidim, and we're going to learn about the Talmidim in the next episode. But when is the Rama first published? This is a mystery that Ad Hayom we don't have a good answer to. At some point, it's assumed it's 1578. That turns out it's well after he dies. But bottom line is, it seems from 1560, in somewhere between 1569 and 1571, some of the Rama on the Shulchan Aruch is published. Okay, so we already jumped to that there's a Shulchan Aruch. Now we have the Rama. The Rama adds Hagais. And if you go over to any person, they'll tell you the reason why the Rama adds these Hagais is he's upset because the Beis Yosef doesn't do fair representation of the world of Ashkenaz. Okay, but already Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolis, who wrote extensively about the Rama, says, when he's talking about when is it first printed, Lo Yadati. He says the Sifsei Yeshanim gives this date, but he says it can't be that's the first thing. It has to be, and based on the Chuvas Rama, we know that there was that it has to be part of the Rama was published in his lifetime. Okay. Anyway, we know the Rama wrote other Seforim, Maharshal His Methods. So now his work of his Aris on the Beis Yosef gets published, and from when it's published, for the most part, all Shulchan Aruchs have the Rabbi Yosef Cairo and the Rama. But what are these hagoyis of the Rama based on? So again, here everyone knows. You learn Torah, you open up your Torah, you have your Beis Yosef, and you have your Darchei Moshe HaKatzer on the bottom. Incredible. So what's going on over here? So everyone knows that the Darchei Moshe is an important work to understand the Rama. He wrote this work. What's the story behind this work? So we're going to learn about the story in mamish a minute, but first, I would like to just mention two sentences. One is that Rabbi Chaim Zalman Margolis, again in this Ma'alos Yochsim, which I quoted already a few times, says, when one learns the Rama, the first place one has to look is in this Darchei Moshe. And that's the way to give us some insight into the Rama, in why the Rama says what he says. Fine. So great. So now my question is, what happened right away? The Rama, let's say I'm learning Shulchan Aruch in 1584. So already the Shulchan Aruch came out with the Haggais Rama, and I want to know what's pshat in a specific thing. I'm learning a Shver Sugi and Choshen Mishpat. Could I go buy or go look at my Darchei Moshe? You'll be shocked to find out that the Darchei Moshe and Choshen Mishpat for the first time was only published in the 1970s. The Darchei Moshe and Even Ezer was published even later. I mean to say, the Rama, the great Paisik of Klal Yisrael, the Ashkenazi Polish Jewry, the Paisik of Klal Yisrael, the work that defines and explains his psakim, Darchei Moshe, was in manuscript. At least Choshen Mishpat and Even Ezer till very recently. Aruch Chaim is published much later than he dies, because we said, when does the Rama die? He dies in 1572. When is the Darchei Moshe on Aruch Chaim first published? 1702. But worse than that, the complete work was not published. The publishers went ahead, tampered with the work, and published a kitzer. So now, significant point number one that I would like to make, which relates to Choshen Mishpat, is we in our generation are zeicha, in order to understand the Rama, one, as Rabbi Chaim Zalman Margolis writes, and many others, the first address to understand the Rama is the Darchei Moshe. We're only zeicha to have the complete Darchei Moshe on Choshen Mishpat in recent years. If you look in the back of the Torah of Mechon Yerushalayim, you'll find it there, but it's also it was originally published as two separate volumes with tons of others. Okay. So this is a significant point because, interesting, people don't know, but in Aruch Chaim, Lamashal, the story is not any better. And when is the first time the Darchei Moshe Ha'aruch is published on Aruch Chaim? 1760. You know how many years that's after? That's almost 200 years after Rama dies. So it's a fascinating thing when you think about it, that people are handling the Rama, as we're going to learn in the next episode already. So some of the people that will handle the Rama, turns out they had in manuscript the Darchei Moshe and Choshen Mishpat. One of those people was the Sma, a Talmud of his, which we're going to learn about in the next episode. And the Shach also, it seems, had a manuscript of Darchei Moshe. In Aruch Chaim, Chiddush Nifla, the Magen Avram quotes hundreds of times the Darchei Moshe well before it's published. He had it in manuscript. Very few people realize such a thing, but Choshen Mishpat, we know that it was only published in our time. Okay. Anyway, so in order to understand, so step number one in understanding a Rama is the Darchei Moshe. This is Aleph Beis. All I'm just bringing out is just to point out how recent it is. Now, I already mentioned that the toldus of all these Gedolim is very important. The Haggamas of these Gedolim is very important for understanding the Mahalach of their Mahalach. So we have Lamashal the Rama. He also gives us insight into why he wrote his work. And basically, he says fascinating things that he basically became Rav in Krakow. Now you have to understand, Krakow was this big city. He wasn't this little shtetl. And he gets the Steller. How he gets the Steller, you could figure out some things from reading this Hagdama. Okay, we're not going to get into that. And basically, he says psakim. It seems some psakim were people had problems with the psakim. We actually gave an episode about talking about the Friday weddings. We saw the Rama was attacked for a psak that he gave, and it seems there was many other psakim of his that were attacked. Anyway, so he decided himself. Seforim were starting to come out. There was a crazy amount of information. We need to have a psak, a chibur, to go to that has the materials that's out there. There's just too much information, as they say, too much to know. So he's going to take from, and he starts listing out in his Darchei Moshe what he's going to do. And he takes information from Chuvas Harash, the Rashba, the Marik, the Rivash, the Trumas Hadeshen. These are important Gedolim. He also throws out the Marivayil, the Maril, Maribruna, and others, and he's taking all different information from them, and he's going to put it all together, and basically it's going to help him. It's going to help people in general know halacha l'maisa. He's going to have an intense chibur with lots of material, mesuder. Now it's unclear how far he was in the project, but it seems he was deep into the project. He says, his lashon is, "U'begia tur Esther, ratzaloymer iser veheter, ischalti hilchas chala." All of a sudden, I find out about the Beis Yosef. So it sounds like it wasn't that he started from Yeridea. It's assumed that it's assumed that he did already write, let's say, L'chol Pachas and Archaim. He finds out this massive work that he has, we'll assume for all purposes it's being written on the Torah. Tons of information, psukim, recent things, all different things. There's a work from Beis Yosef, and then he finds out more. What's this work of the Beis Yosef? And he gets a hold of it. And if you read the next few lines in the Darchei Moshe, you literally see he is shocked. It's sort of like he gets depressed. Nemes bekirbi kimoy mayim aches balalti al avi shemayim. He's ice mensch. What's going to be? The Beis Yosef basically has a crazy amount of information. Now you have to understand something. This is right after the printing press, and Seforim are coming out. And so he's in Krakow, and the Beis Yosef is in Tzfas. And both these Gedolim, not telling each other, are aiming on that there's a ton of information, and it's a problem for halacha l'maisa. So we already spoke about the Beis Yosef, that the Beis Yosef realizes. He also realizes. But more than that, we're not going to get into it, but he's basically going against the Messiah of his Rabbeim, Reb Shachni, his father-in-law, and he's taken to task from this with this Nakuda by the brother, the Maharshal, his Chavrusa in Yeshiva in Krakow. By Shalom Shachni's Yeshiva, this is beyond the scope of today. But the point is, he's all very depressed, and then he realizes his tefillas are answered. He realizes there's still what to do from his material, but he has to do major revision. He has to fix it, his work. So he says what he does. I'm not going to bring all the arichos, and he says what he brings you from the Mar Nevuchim over here. He's going to be mekater, okay, and he has a beautiful piece about the significance of kitzur, of being mekater, and this is a very big discussion in its own right, because that's actually part of the fear of the Beis Yosef and his Agdama, which we discussed, is too much being mekater, relying on kitzur Seforim is problematic. You have to see the root of the things. Okay, but here the Rama is working off that the Beis Yosef exists already. Now, he says, but more significantly, is that there's a lot of material that the Beis Yosef doesn't bring down. And this is a very important point, which needs to be discussed by Richos, but in short, the Ashkenazi Messiah, Marivayil, and all these such things, it seems the Beis Yosef didn't have it, doesn't bring it, and that's a problem. So, says Reb Moshe Israel says we need to bring this down, and this is a very important. It's a missing chelik of the beautiful work of the Beis Yosef. It's not an attack. It's just that he's in Svarad, he's bringing down the Messiah, Tzfas, etc., and this is all missing. But then he goes even further. He says, and it's more than that. It also, the Beis Yosef says, I'm bringing down lots of information, and the Beis Yosef says, how do I? But then the Beis Yosef says, but what about Psak Halacha? And the Beis Yosef says, what everyone knows, the famous thing. He's going to go the Rif, Rosh, and Rambam. He picks whoever it's Rive. So if it's, in many cases, it's obviously going to be the Rif and the Rambam. So the Rosh / Ashkenaz / Pailim Messiah, it's going to be out the window. Says Rama. What do you mean? All us people from Ashkenaz Pailim, we go with this Messiah. So he says, no, there's a cloud called Halacha Kibasroi. This is a huge sugya, how this works. So it's interesting. The Beis Yosef uses one psak of Klali Psak for his, and we pointed out one of the works that Beis Yosef published was a work on Klali Psak. He was an expert in Klali Psak. So even though he's bringing a ton of information, it's not so much his own psak. And the Rama says the same thing. I'm bringing you information based on this incredible information, and information that the Beis Yosef doesn't have. But more than that, there's also Ashkenazi Messiah, such as, let's say, other Maharshal Taisvis, the Beis Yosef, where he says in his list, I'm bringing you Taisvis. But Halacha L'maisa, no, that's not so important for the Beis Yosef. Says Rama, what do you mean? We rely on it. We need it. Anyway, so the Darchei Moshe is Meirich, and he says that basically there was a few different reasons why it was significant for him still, even though he was depressed at first, to publish his work. Okay. Now, just to mention a few last points, just a few more minutes, which we'll jump in to get back to the Rama. We're going to go first off to the Maharshal. There was one more gadol in this period of time that, I mean, there were many gedolim, but that's important for our story, and that is the Maharshal, Shlomo Luria. So Shlomo Luria, he's born in 1510, he dies in 1573. So he's a little older than the Rama, but he dies right after the Rama. So we know, everyone knows, there's a word called Yam Shel Shlomo, say them. So you'll see, and I'm not going to bother to list out all the people that say this, but there's a common shita amongst many people that are Isaac in these type of inyanim. Historians, they say the Maharshal was a goyin hagoyinim. If you look just to see the Tzemach David, how does he describe Rav Shlomo Luria? He says, "Moifes azman asher la'ira yelchu kol ha'amim u'miyamiv sheisin kol tfutzas Yisrael." This is a contemporary of his, the Tzemach David. V'shamu yatzmi kol ha'olam v'mi talmidim harbe v'hiflig al anshe der v'chibur chibur hagadol al kol hashitas ha'talmud asher ein erech legadol la'oin kol charifasei v'kar is a yam shel shloimo. But we weren't zeicha for it yet to be published, and he says he dies in 1573. So you see, he's giving major, he's talking about him like really glowingly. If you read the line before, when he talks about the Rama, he says, "Yechaser hashalem asher b'chibura v'nei hagoyla b'sefer tarzayla." I mean, talmidim harbe v'vitzari b'Yisrael. But by the Maharshal, you see even someone of that generation how he's talking about the Maharshal, unbelievable. Okay, now, so we have the Yid Maharshal, and he writes the Yam Shel Shlomo. So what's accepted by many people is that pretty much there was no impact on this work. It was amazing work at that period of time, but after that, forget about it. And they even use all types of lashonos, and I'd rather not even quote them but the point is, it doesn't have impact on Klal Yisrael, so to speak. Fine. The problem is when one starts learning Choshen Mishpat and one learns the Shach, all of a sudden, and the Bach earlier than the Shach, or the Smaiv, and then you see the Maharshal is quoted 1,000,000 times. So today we have what's known as Bar Ilan. You could search, and searching through the chibur of these Gedolei HaPaiskim, the Noisei Kelim Shulchan Aruch, which we're going to start talking about next episode, we see the Bach quotes the Maharshal hundreds of times. The Shach quotes well over 1,000, I would say close to 1,300 times he quotes the Maharshal. The Magen Avram quotes the Maharshal hundreds of times. So we see that it's not so simple what they say, oh, the Yam Shel Shlomo, it was amazing work, but it didn't have an impact. It did. But there's a few other points to this, and this is how we'll get back to Rama. Number one, does the Maharshal write other things? Yeah, he does, and those things are more famous. His Agos to the Tur, his Chachma Shloima and the Gemara, the Tshuvas Maharshal, his Bir on Smag, and other works. But it's not enough to just go take a computer search engine and find that Gedolim quote him. Okay, say them. The answer is that, as we said, we just quoted from the Tzemach David, he's Rosh Hashiva, he's one of the Gedolei Hadar, he has tons of Talmidim. Who are his Talmidim? So his Talmidim are amongst these following people: the Rabbi Shua Valak, the Sma, which we're going to learn about next time; the Emek Abracha, the father of the Shla; the Masas Ben Yamin, the Levush. Okay, then there's a Yid Maharshal Hasheni. There's the Ramosha Mat, the Mati Moshe. There's a Yid Mishul and Faivash Krakow. All these people are Talmidim of the Maharshal. These Talmidim go on to be the Rabbeim of the next generation of Paiskim, such as the Bach and onwards, and Shach, Sma, and we already quoted the Sma. So number two is the Torah Shabbal Peh of the Maharshal has an impact. Say there, but it's more than that. And this, but we'll stop here for a second and point out that the Rama shares Talmidim with the Maharshal. Many Talmidim of the Maharshal were also Talmidim of the Rama. Those Talmidim, the Sma, Rav Avram Horowitz, the father of the Shla, the Emek Bracha, the Masas Ben Yamin and the Levush, they're also Talmidim of the Rama. Something very interesting is going on here, which we'll get back to shortly. Now, what is the Maharshal, besides Torah Shabbal Peh, what is the Maharshal so famous for? As I said, the Tzemach David speaks about him, unbelievable. And the people of that generation, the way they talk about the Maharshal is unbelievable. What made him so unique? So again, just like we said by the Beis Yosef and the Rama, they left behind these Hagdamas to the Seforim. So the Maharshal also did. And in these Hagdamas, he outlines his method of psak. And one of the things is he holds, again, there's a crazy amount of information out there, but you have to start from scratch. And that's what he does. He checks everything. He gathers everything, but he learns. He spends crazy amount of time learning it. He describes in his various places. I spent a week on this sugya. I spent a crazy amount of time being Mesader all the days. I checked everything. The Maharshal also, just like the Beis Yosef had this massive library, he also had an impressive library. I would not say as good as the Beis Yosef, but he uses the Beis Yosef's library, which we threw out there already earlier. Now, he checks to make sure the Svarim are muga. We know he's very into the tfus of the Gemara to make sure that there's ha'aris are there, that everything is proper. We even know that he has hundreds of ha'aris on davening, according to the Siddur of Shafsi Sefer, beyond Mishun and the Kagayin. But the point is, he checks everything from scratch. He starts the sugya, similar to what the Beis Yosef says, I'm making it easy, you're going to have it all in front of you. The Maharshal does this. This is one of his things. You have to start from the Shayrish, Hadavar, start from the Gemara, from the Makairis. Not to start from, so to speak, I'm going to learn the sugya, start with the Torah. No, you have to make sure you're starting from the Gemara going on downwards. And this is what you see, the Arichas Nifla, when you learn a piece in Yam Shel Shloima. It's Mesudar, but it has tons of Arichas. Another thing is, Taisus plays a major role for him, for all different aspects, but one aspect is again, because he holds the Talmud is so significant, so the Taisus, what did Taisus do is, and this the Maharshal even says as Alashon, that when you learn Taisus brings as it's not just this sugya. There's another Gemara, it's a stira. Taisus is miyashavit. This was very important for the Maharshal. And this is its own bazunder shmuz. And then the last thing is, as opposed to the Rama that says, I'm going halacha kebasroi, or the later paiskim that he brings from the Maril and the Trumas Hadesh and all these paiskim, or as opposed to the Beis Yosef that says, after I bring you all this information, I'm going to come up with a klal that I go basaroi, which is going to be Rambam, Rif, and Rosh. Many times it's going to end up being the Rambam and the Rif are going to be on one side, the Rosh is going to be out. So both of these paiskim are relying on Kol Yapsak. Says the Maharshal, no, I rely on each sugya by itself. Don't hide behind the klal, so to speak. You have to paskin based on the sugya, not so much into the kolam. Okay, so now here's how we'll wrap this up like this. What about the Mahalach of the Rama itself? Do we know more about the Mahalach of the Rama besides what he says in Darchei Moshe? No problem. Less than 5 minutes. So to wrap this up like this, the Rama and the Maharshal, turns out, not only do they have Talmidim, but there were a lot of aspects that were very similar. Intense iyun of learning through Chuvas Rama, we'll see this, that he would check the sources very carefully. He didn't just wake up one day, he decided, okay, a few different Rishonim, he checks, and he reaches a psak. It was learning the sugis very, very carefully, similar to the methods of the Maharshal. Obviously, there were some differences, and that's why Talmidim, I think that's part of when the Talmidim went from one to the other, there was more similarities than one realizes. So now, to conclude, is as follows. This is the first generation, so to speak, which has the impact. They write these works. So the methods of these Gedolim, of the Beis Yosef, which is that it's not good enough just to look at secondary sources or kitzur svarim. You have to start from scratch. Is something universal for also for the Rama and also for the Maharshal, to check up all these things, to check up the sources very carefully, and then only then to learn through the sugyas. So many times the Rama does have psakim of his own, with his own shoulders, so to speak. When you learn through Chuvas Rama, you can see that easily. And some of those psakim are found sprinkled throughout his Darchei Moshe. And the same thing really with the Beis Yosef. Even though Beis Yosef does hide behind these kolim, it's clear that there is his own voice in the work. Anyway, the point is, just to sum it up, is that these three works they laid the foundations. They're the Rabbeim, and the next generations were busy until today to be mefarish these works. The Maharshal less so, because he didn't write a Shulchan Aruch / Ramah type work. But as I said, his Mahalach Halimud, which I'm claiming is also, there is some very great similarities with the Ramah, and we'll see more in the next episode, affects how the Gedolei HaPoskim, starting from the Sma and onwards, Vush, learn, and this gives us some insight in something that's going on over here in the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch Nesikiru.